Hey, welcome everybody to Hope for Our Times. Listen, it's our Monday live program. I have a special guest I'm going to introduce you to in just a minute. I'm guessing you already know who he is because we've been promoting it on YouTube and also on Instagram. Hey, listen, real quick, I'm going to ask you to pray for something. We have a lot of interesting opportunities that are happening right now with us, and haven't been able to share all of them with you, but one of them is an outreach to Mexico, not just like a small area of Mexico, but all of Mexico, and is taking messages that I have to do, basic Bible prophecy, and they're going to be translated in studio. I'm going to have somebody with me that's going to speak Spanish. I'm going to talk on the rapture, for example, and I'll say a sentence, and they're going to translate into Spanish, and we're going to go back and forth like that. We have a whole lot of subjects we're going to be doing, pretty much everything that you can cover to give people in Mexico a really good understanding of Bible prophecy, introduce them to it. And so this is a real neat opportunity. We have a global outreach, and God is blessing us with that outreach. And there's things that are required, resources, but it's really a blessing from God just that we have the opportunity to do that. We've been getting the request for quite a while. So it's not just going to be on YouTube channels coming out of Mexico, but also radio stations in Mexico. Really neat opportunity. Few other things I'd love to tell you about that are coming. We're doing a lot of build outs here. So you're going to see our set change a little bit from time to time over the next several weeks. But listen, we're just, I'm thinking we're in the last days, and we're going to do everything that we can to reach as many people as we possibly can with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have the truth, we have the hope, and so that's what we do. And it's like using whatever resources we possibly can as God opens the doors. So a lot more to tell you, but if you could pray about this with Mexico, as God has opened up that door of opportunity, we're going to go for it. And with that, I have a special guest today, and I consider him an expert on geopolitical events in the world, especially if they're going to affect Israel. So we're going to be going to Israel today through the events and through the Bible. And we're also going to be looking at some possible, what's the nuclear threat coming from Russia to the United States. I'm going to ask my guest that too. But right now, please welcome Bill Salus. Bill, it's great to have you on the program with me today. It's been a few months.
It has been, Tom. Thanks for bringing me on board.
So you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. You have anything you want to say before we get going?
Well, I do. And, Tom, in the next days and maybe weeks, we're going to be inundated with the mainstream media reporting on the Russian-Ukrainian war from the secular world perspective. We're going to hear about the tug of war between Russia and Ukraine and the West versus Russia and the sad state of affairs concerning the humanitarian crisis. The media is going to ask questions and obtain opinions from the political pundits and military analysts. Will this become World War III? Will this mushroom into a nuclear war? What will President Biden and the West do? What is behind Putin's mindset? Is Putin out of touch with the Russian people? And the list of questions go on and on. And these are legitimate questions, Tom, but the best the media can do is report what's happening now and guess at what's going to happen next. But the wise tune into your program and try to get the biblical narrative and prophetic perspective of what could really be happening in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, praise the Lord we have the Bible, because, man, what a mess. And we don't know what's fake news, what's real news. We're going to be taking questions in just a few minutes, Bill, but I'm going to throw out something to you already. A question I saw already on the feed is this a wag the tail situation that we have going on between Russia, Ukraine, United States, China, throwing all of the players? What do you think?
It really could. We're also watching nefarious actors like China going after Taiwan and Iran, their nuclear program. Meanwhile, those talks are going on in Vienna. That's also very troubling. So I was speaking the other day at a congregation, and I said, President Joe Biden has become a war president, whether we like it or not, or he likes it or not. It looks like he is going to be a wartime president. And I think that's what we're going to be looking at here in the next year or two.
Yeah, wartime president with Biden leading us. This is a frightening thing for the entire Western world. That's my opinion. And I have a feeling there's a lot of people that agree with that too.
I agree with that.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let's get started here. Here's the first question for you. How concerned is Israel about events that are taking place in Ukraine?
Well, they're concerned on several different fronts. At least four reasons I would cite. One is there's actually Jews living in Ukraine, tens of thousands. Estimates are as low as 43,000. Some are as high as 200,000 in that range. The other thing that they're concerned about is the weapons that may be deployed or exported to Syria from Russia are being battle tested in the war in Ukraine right now, and they're concerned that they're going to come and make their way into Syria. And recently, Russia came out and denied Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is a strategic area between Israel and Syria. That Israel, Donald Trump acknowledged Israel's sovereignty over that, and Israel's annexed that, but Russia came out against that, just recently. Also, Russia's come out vocally and said they don't approve of Israel's continued airstrikes into Syria, which Israel does on a frequent basis, trying to prevent the flow of weapons from Iran through Syria into Hezbollah. And the other thing, I think the big lesson for Israel right here is because the West is not acting very rapidly, and with Russia's not receiving any consequences really at this point from the West, Israel's concerned that they have to exist on their own strength. They're concerned that nefarious actors might start doing the same thing like Iran and their proxies against Israel. So Israel's watching this with wide open eyes. Now, Bennett had recently had a conversation with Putin, but it was mainly talking about humanitarian needs and things like that. So there's not a whole lot anybody can do right now. Putin's got a mindset of his own right now.
He does. So looking at, you mentioned that recently Russia said, hey, Israel, you're not going to be flying into Syrian airspace anymore. I think that's about 3 weeks ago that statement came out, wasn't it?
At least, and maybe even further back.
Further back. And then just the other day, I think it was on Thursday or Friday, with a statement about the Golan Heights and saying, we're not recognizing that as Israeli territory. So this, and really what they're saying is that Syrian territory. So this plays into, we can see the direction Russia is going. It seems to me, Bill, Russia is already signaling Israel, we have your number. And it's like they're saying, we're going to eventually take you on. That seems to be what they're already throwing out. When I used to do martial arts, it was, you would telegraph. You never want to telegraph what you're doing unless you're intending someone to know. And it seems to me, Russia seems to be telegraphing this message to Israel and to the entire world.
Right. Vladimir Putin has come on the record early on in his tenure and said the worst thing that ever happened to Russia in modern history was the collapse of the Soviet Empire. But he echoed behind that, the best thing that will happen in the modern era for Russia will be the revival of the Soviet Empire. And we're seeing Russia right now trying to spread its hegemony, take back some of those countries like the Ukraine and that sort of thing. And that's alarming because we know in the end times, Russia's going to come against Israel with a bunch of hordes or a vast coalition of Turkey and Iran and many other countries. And it's interesting in that prophecy, Tom, in Ezekiel 38, it says, in the latter days, thoughts will arise in some Russian president's mind, and he will make an evil plan. And the evil plan is he will come against, he says, my people Israel, not Ukraine, like a cloud to cover the land. It'll be in the latter days. Okay, latter days is an important clue. But I will bring you against my land, and the nations may know me, and I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before their eyes, Gog being a title of a Russian leader. Now, we're in the latter days. I think most of the viewers on this program right now would suggest, as do you and I. And we've seen this Russian president, this Gog of sorts, get the plans of an evil thought to invade. Now, he's invading just with Russia, and he's invading Ukraine to be a buffer to the West, of course, but also Ukraine is a breadbasket of Europe. It's the second largest in gas reserves in Europe, although most of those are untapped. Ukraine is the fifth largest producer of world corn, and between Russia and Ukraine, they're the fourth largest producers of wheat. So this is more than just a buffer against the West. This is he's got goals with Ukraine's advance.
Yeah, I don't think that what you just said is reported anywhere in mainstream media. I would have Mark Henry on last night. We talked a little bit about that. And that's the reality of Ukraine. You look at what they're able to produce with their farmland. It's not unlike California in the sense of what it's able to produce. The amount of agriculture that comes out of there and I read that they could feed 600 million people. So when you look at the resources, you mentioned untapped gas. We know this is a big issue right now. Amongst the many other resources you mentioned, you go, Ukraine is like a gold mine for Putin.
You're right, and he took a big gamble with this aggressive act, because he ran the risk, and it happened, of having the Nord Stream 2 pipeline shut down by Germany. You know, that pipeline is supposed to carry, I think, I could be wrong on this, 39 billion gallons of gas through the Baltic area. It's not with Ukraine. They built this to avoid having to go through Ukraine into Germany. It was completed in September of last year, but it needs some final certifications from Germany to approve it and allow it to go, and the gas to flow. And Germany has said with this advance into Ukraine that they're not going to approve that. But it's interesting that they need that gas. So Russia, I think, hedged the bet that, well, listen, we could lose that Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It could shut down probably temporarily. But if we get into Ukraine, we can more than amply do what we need to do with the gas reserves they have.
Oh, yeah, it's really fascinating. It's still hard to tell which part's real news, which part's fake news. And also, I mean, we know that we get constantly lied to. It's whatever propaganda that, I would say, Bill, the military industrial complex of the United States wants to release, that's what we're going to hear about. And there's a lot of things that we don't hear about. And if you're not paying attention to things like we do, it's really hard to make. In fact, for us, it's even hard to make all the different sense of everything that's going on. What's Putin's real intentions? We do know the end result, where this eventually is going to go, but for right now, it's, you know, we go back and forth with these things. I have a lot more questions to ask you before we even get to the questions from everybody online. I'm going to ask you this about nuclear issues, because the last few days we've been, you know, in fact, I have a report here, or an article here, about the threats of Russia with nuclear attacks against the United States. I mean, they're not, it's like hints. Well, you do this, guess what? This is what's going to happen to you. You know, we're reading about cyber attacks, those threats, but also nuclear attacks. And there's a hypersonic missile that Russia also has. From what I understand, the U.S. does not have a defense against that, because the U.S. defense systems have fallen so far behind.
Well, the nuclear threat is on the table. Putin raised that. He's on high alert with his nuclear program. As a result of what's going on. And he mentioned that, and of course, a French diplomat came out and said, well, don't forget the West has nuclear weapons as well. But it's commonly understood by the nuclear powers, predominantly the ones of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which would be Russia, Germany, France, the UK, Russia, and China. The ones negotiating in Vienna for the Iran deal, by the way. It's commonly understood that you can't win a nuclear war. And the mutual assured destruction that was so dominant during the Soviet Empire when Reagan was president back then, it's still in play. I mean, Russia understands that we got a lot of nuclear weapons in the West as well. So it's a threat, because Putin said, listen, if you guys come in and intervene, the West will experience consequences that they had never experienced before, some quote like that. So basically, I think it's a very live threat, but I think Russia's not that stupid.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, because lately it seems, if the reports are valid that are coming out of all this, then Putin is also acting very irrationally. But again, it's like, you know, what are we led to believe at the same time? So let me ask you some more questions, because I do want to get over to China also. But does a potential Russian overthrow of Ukraine, I mean, I don't see Ezekiel 38 happening tomorrow. This is me. I think there's some other things, but a potential overthrow of Ukraine, what's the outcome for Israel in that regard? I'm going to ask you two questions, actually. So I'm going to throw this one in there. What is Israel's number one national security concern presently?
Right, and it's not Russia taking over Ukraine. It's the existential threat that exists between Iran's nuclear weapons and their proxies that they have their tentacles spread around Israel's neck over there, with Hezbollah to the north with 150,000 precision-guided missiles. Not some of them are precision-guided. Syria, which had used 300 chemical weapons 300 times in the revolution. Hamas, which can lob 1,000 missiles a day. Now estimates are, as can Hezbollah. Hezbollah can actually lob 2,000 missiles a day. The Houthis, who way down below Saudi Arabia and Yemen, said recently they can actually launch ICBMs into Tel Aviv. And of course, you got militias in Shiite Iran militias in Iraq. So that's the number one threat and concern. And that's why Israel is watching these Vienna talks, which are going on their 8th round after 10 months of talks, with those P5+1 countries who I just mentioned that have the nuclear weapons, involving Russia and China too. So they resumed talks yesterday, and Russia's in these talks, even though they're in the midst of this invasion. And this is such a farce, these talks, but Israel has said that they reserve the right to protect their own interests, no matter what happens to this JCPOA, and they're right to do that. Russia has got contracts with Iran to build 2 more nuclear reactors in the Bushehr province. And that'll come out in 2024 and 2026. That's Bushehr 2 and Bushehr 3. China has recently signed a $400 billion contract over 25 years with Iran to boost up their economy in return for oil and reserves and things. So Iran is playing with a stacked deck, and this is and there's no way they're going to roll back the things they've done since Trump backed out of that JCPOA in 2018. They're already enriching uranium 60 to 60%, which is a stone's throw away from 90%, which can get them a nuclear weapon. They're not. Something may happen on this nuclear agreement. That's what they're starting to hint about. But Israel would be wise, and I think they're even considering attacking Iran before this happens, because once they attack Iran, if America and the West and Russia and China sign on with this JCPOA again with Iran, all of a sudden Israel stands in opposition with all of them. So it's a very precarious position for Israel right now, and Iran is their number one threat.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. So there's a document that came out just the other day saying that China, Russia, and Iran are forming, they're attempting to form their own new world order and to eliminate democracy as we know it. So if we just go back over the last couple of years, we can see that COVID has pretty much just, look at the Western world. It's been, it's the Western world that has really gone, the wokeism that's been birthed out of it, and so many other things. Bill, when I look at what's taken place in the last 2 years, what's happened in America, Europe, you look at Australia, obviously Canada, just go through the Western world, Israel, and what's been exposed is their governments and this wokeness mentality. You would think that as we've watched the world in such these perplexing times, that the world leaders would say something like, you know what, we need to think through this a little bit better. Instead, they've gone further and further into this bizarre immorality. They've gone all these different directions that are totally off the wall. And our leaders in the Western world are making the worst decisions that you could possibly make. I think it was James Baker. Wasn't James Baker, wasn't he part of the Obama administration?
I'm not sure about that. I think he went back before that to Bush.
Okay, he went back to Bush. Okay, it was one of the Obama administration foreign policies guys who came out today and said that Biden has made the worst possible decision on every foreign policy decision that could have been made. And I don't think many people would disagree with that, except for some of the nuts that are in Hollywood.
Well, Tom, I would quote Daniel 2:21 that says, "It's the Lord who changes times and seasons and removes and raises up kings and gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those with understanding." Biden's in office. How he got there, whether he literally won it, legitimately won it, or whether it was vote fraud, or I know that debate still wages on, but he's in office right now, and he's in office at a critical time in history where Russia is making advanced aggression to move their hegemony and to revive the Soviet Empire, where China's now, Russia made their invasion of Ukraine the day after the Chinese Olympics ended. It's sort of real professional courtesy, right? China's watching this war. If Russia goes through it without any Western intervention, China's going to think, well, gee, Taiwan's a pushover for us. And that opens a pathway to the Pacific. And you're talking about a new axis of evil that they're concerned about, which is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. So these times are very, very interesting. These are war times right now, and we're about to see things, in my estimation, that are going to have epic biblical prophetic implications.
Okay, well, this article is from today. It's out of Epoch Times. Biden says sanctions not immediate, lays out only other option against Russia. So, Bill, you bring up is the West even going to get involved? It was last week when Biden said this absurd statement, well, we'll see how the sanctions go against Russia, and we'll reevaluate in a month, while he went down into his basement. We're going to reevaluate in a month after sanctions. That's your answer to this Russia-Ukraine thing. And then now he says, well, the sanctions are not even going to be immediate. Sanctions, let alone anything else. And you're thinking the absurdity of the entire Western world and the leaders of the Western world thinking, what can they do? It's like none of them, their heads are so screwed up that they can't even agree on anything to do anything. So go ahead.
The world's headed for a global order, and it's not going to be a good thing. We know that there's coming one world order in the end times. When you look at the response, specifically of America and the UK, they've come out and said, we're going to throw sanctions at you. We're opposed to what you're doing, Russia, this sort of thing. To me, it's very reminiscent of what we're going to see on the sideline protesters in Ezekiel 38:13 when Russia makes its advance with its Ezekiel 38 coalition against Israel. And they're standing on the sidelines going, what are you doing, Russia? Are you coming for plunder and booty? And I want to take a second just to tell the viewers, okay, I just came out with a DVD here called Ezekiel 38, When God Defends Israel. It's a 3-disc DVD that Prophecy Watchers produced, and Mano Gonzalez and I did. In the DVD, Tom, the reason I bring this up is because I've put forward a strong argument biblically, archaeologically, geopolitically, that the young lions of Tarshish, one of the protesters, could probably be the UK, and the merchants of Tarshish, rather, and their young lions could be the colonies, namely America that was involved. And what do we see now? They're throwing sanctions at Russia, going, this is not good, Russia. What are you doing? There's no teeth in what they're doing, even right now. And it sounds like that's going to be the case when Ezekiel 38 happens. They're just going to simply throw some more sanctions out there and hope they stick. And that's just not going to work for Russia.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm going to shift gears here for a second, Bill, because we're going to talk about something nobody else is really talking about. There are proxies of Iran that are missing in action in Ezekiel chapter 38. And many colleagues disagree with you, as you know, on Psalm 83, but you bring up a good point. And I've heard some of my colleagues say, hey, when you look at the Ezekiel 38 nations that invade Israel, what about all the people immediately surrounding Israel? Why are they not in it when these are the people who make the big issues with Israel right now? So, I mean, you explained it really well. I'd like to hear your point of view on where are they all in Ezekiel 38?
Well, that's a very good point, and I think it needs to be observed because those are the enemy proxies that share common borders with Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syria, just to the northeast of Israel, Hamas in the Gaza area, Houthis are down south, but you've got the Iraq Shiite militias. All those countries, except the Houthis down there, are listed in their own individual prophecy in Psalm 83. Now, I believe that if Israel does invade Iran, and I think someone's going to invade Iran, and I think in fulfillment of a prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49 dealing with Elam, verses 34 through 39, and I cover that in this DVD as well, this prophecy. And I think when that happens, and it'll probably be Israel, it'll create a disaster, and it seems to be nuclear. And Iran's going to call upon Syria and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Shiite militias in Iraq and the Houthis and Iran themselves, and they're going to, in my estimation, they're going to come against Israel in a massive attack. Iran has missiles, and I believe they're ICBMs that can get to Israel in 8 minutes. And they can hit Tel Aviv, and they can hit Ben Gurion Airport, and they can hit the Dimona reactor. And I think when that happens, Isaiah 17 is going to happen, Isaiah 17:1, which says, Damascus will cease from being a city, it will be a ruinous heap. That's Isaiah 17:1. It says Isaiah 17:9, there'll be desolation caused by the children of Israel, not the Assyrian Empire of the past, but the Israel Defense Forces of today. And Isaiah 17:14 says, at one night you see Damascus, at eventide you see him, but in the morning he is no more. I'm seeing that these kind of things could happen in the near future. And when that happens, Israel gets into a war against the proxies. And that war probably does then lead into the Psalm 83 final fulfillment. Now, some people say Psalm 83 already found fulfillment in 1948, because if you understand the prophecy, the first 5 verses talk about this confederacy with this devious plan, and they want to cut the name of Israel off the map, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. Then verses 6 to 8 talk about the belligerents in the confederacy, and they do turn out to be Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Hamas down there, the Palestinians, etc. And those countries all did come against Israel in 1948. But the problem is you got to read all the rest of the verses. There's 18 verses in Psalm 83, like there's 18 verses in Isaiah 17, and you got to read them all. And what happens in verses 9 on, it shows that the Israeli Defense Forces get empowered, and they defeat decisively their Arab enemies, and the Arab enemies no longer oppress them anymore. That's what's being said in that psalm. And we find out in 1963 and 1970, 1967 rather, 1973, the Arabs kept coming back against Israel. They still stand to oppress Israel. Hezbollah is wanting to take out Israel. So I'm watching for that prophecy. I'm watching for Jeremiah 49, Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, and then I think that's going to set the stage for Ezekiel 38. And why is it that Russia, who seems to be able to mow over Ukraine so far, hopefully that won't happen, but it does look like that's imminent at this point. Why does Russia need so many more troops to be involved in Ezekiel 38 if they can just, there's 44 million people in Ukraine, and there's only 9 to 10 million in Israel. But Russia's going to come forward with about 2.5 million troops with that confederacy against Israel, which is right at this point around about 176,000 troops. So, I mean, what happens? It creates that environment where Russia feels the need to bring all that big coalition down against Israel. I think we're looking at a different Israel at that time. I think, and why aren't the proxies involved? Because they're involved. They're Iran's proxies. Iran's involved in Ezekiel 38. Yeah. Why would they not be coming against Israel with Iran? I think they're taken out in advance.
Interesting. Brandon Holt seems to support your view, and he presented in his mind, he seems like it's pretty probable what you just said. And he believed that Israel is going to also acquire more booty at that point when they acquire more of their landmass from Psalm 83, which would also be another reason for Russia to come down into Israel. We know that they're going into Israel because of Ezekiel chapter 38 for something of value that Israel has. I believe it's likely energy. It makes sense. Brandon presented probably oil and gas. Oil would be what they would acquire through these other battles that would take place with Psalm 83. I'm going to throw something else out to you also, Bill. We were supposed to go to questions now, but we're going to give it another minute. If you guys could get ready to send in your questions in about a minute. Everybody watching online, that would be great. Don't forget to put the word question in all caps. But Bill, in Ezekiel chapter 38, you have, it appears that you have 2 different things that take place, which I believe fits with your thoughts on Jeremiah 49 and Psalm 83, the whole thing. You have what appears to be boots on the ground coming. You have Russia descending like a cloud, but you also have boots on the ground, horse and bucklers. And if you look at Israel taking out the ability of Iran and other armies to be able to fight against them with conventional weapons, it would fit with Ezekiel 38 in the description of the battle. That's what some of our colleagues would say. What do you say about that?
Well, I don't think these are literal horses and bucklers.
What do you think they are?
Well, I think Russia's going to come with its best weapons on the shelf, probably ABCs, atomic, biological, and chemical.
Okay, I think that's this is what I would say, but you have the 2 different descriptions. You have Russia descending like a cloud, but you also have a description of horse and buckler, which is a completely different description. So
no, they're not really riding horses these days from the uttermost parts of the north. They would be coming with their tanks and artillery.
Okay, that's what I was saying. So they be coming, it's still a boots on the ground is what it would be a reference to.
Well, I think it's possible because what it says there is, and it's important to note that it's not America or the Israeli Defense Forces that stopped this formidable invasion. It's God himself supernaturally, and there's a reason for that. But it says he first starts with a great earthquake, and that great earthquake panics these soldiers who speak different languages, and they're coming inside the northern part of Israel. And it says every man's sword will be against his brother, and they start killing each other. It's kind of like what happened with the Midianites when Gideon came after them with a 300-man army. They started killing each other. And then it says there'll be great hailstones and fire and brimstone and flooding rains and that sort of thing. And then in the end, when the world has watched this and it makes it real clear to them, wow, that was the God of the Jews. It says in Ezekiel 39:7, I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore. The nation shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. God is going to use this marquee event to put the world on official notice. He's the one true God, Tom. And so then Israel is going to burn those weapons for 7 years and convert them into energy. And it's interesting that there's already the technology of taking nuclear warheads and using it in energy has already been implemented by the United States. Here's a couple of headlines. This is the Mighty History article back in 2000, March of 21. Russian nuclear warheads provided electricity for the U.S. for 20 years. Here's one from me from NPR. Megatons to megawatts. Russian warheads fuel U.S. power plants. That was in December of 2013. I like the Times of Israel, and the New York Times says power for U.S. from Russia's old nuclear weapons. So in other words, the technology already exists today in America, and I'm sure Israel is going to have this as well, to convert nuclear warheads that I would suggest Russia's not going to leave behind, especially if they're bringing this big advance down, into energy and fuel and convert it into fuel.
Very fascinating. I'm going to go to some questions, and I'm also going to have you answer one more question I want to ask. But let me go to some questions from everybody that's online right now. Ready for this one, Bill? I got several of them. A bunch of them are lined up. If Putin is in Russia when he attacks Israel and God destroys Russia, how will Putin be destroyed? Of course, this person is assuming that Putin is the Gog of Magog. So I think we need to clarify that first of all. So basically, I would say more correctly, if the leader of Russia is in Russia when he attacks Israel and God destroys Russia, how will the leader of Russia be destroyed?
Right. Well, and that's a really good question. And, you know, there is concerns because we're living in the latter years. We're seeing a Russian leader devise an evil plan of invasion. And these are details in Ezekiel 38, not of Ukraine, though, but of Israel. So we would say Putin is becoming very Gog-esque, I guess would be the word. But the thing is, we can't, pin the tail on that, on Putin as the Gog of Magog, because we don't know exactly when the prophecy is going to find fulfillment and what Putin's tenure is going to be. But whoever the Russian leader is at that time, it does seem like he does lead the charge. He doesn't seem to sit in Russia. He seems to come down with the troops because he does get killed along with them. And they all get buried in the valley of Hamon-Gog, which means the hordes of Gog, together, is in a valley east of some sea, which I believe will be central Jordan at that time after Israel takes over most of Jordan after Psalm 83. But so Putin's going to be, not to say Putin, excuse me, but the Russian leader is going to go down with his troops. It appears to be from the details of that prophecy.
Yeah, interesting about this. We need to be careful. Putin is very Gog-esque, but to just say Putin is Gog, we don't know the timing of this, which I'm going to ask you a little bit more about the timing in a second. But it's the same thing people will do with Antichrist and false prophet. They'll say, well, the false prophet is the Pope. And if I respond, well, he's kind of old. Well, yeah, but he could become the false prophet tomorrow. Well, there's a problem with that because the false prophet is still alive 7 years at the end of the tribulation because he's in Armageddon. So it could be the Pope. I don't know. God can miraculously sustain the Pope from the rapture through the gap all the way through the 7 years, and the Pope could still be around at the end of the tribulation period of Armageddon. But I mean, it's this kind of thinking that we need to be careful of when we label this person as that or that person as that. Bill, I don't know if you get it, but I get probably about 5 emails a week of somebody naming Antichrist and false prophet. And if I open up my email, I'll probably get about 100 emails a week. And it's just so fascinating to watch all of it. And it's not always the best exercise to go through.
No, and we have to be careful not to sensationalize current events and try to marry them up with the scriptures. That's called newspaper exegesis. These prophecies are ancient. I mean, 3,000 years ago, Psalm 83, 2,600 years ago, Ezekiel 38. You know, they've been waiting for their appropriate time to roll off the parchments and pound down on the pavement. And in the latter years, most all these are scheduled to find fulfillment. And we are living in the latter years. So it's not going to be surprising to read in the news something that matches up with the prophetic passage. We just have to be real careful how we interpret it. And if we start pinning the tail on certain people, the Pope or Putin, that sort of thing, we need to be careful of that, because what happens is the secular world watches us on TV and things like that, and they go, well, that guy missed that. Putin dies all of a sudden, or the Pope dies. Well, that guy was wrong on that, and what else is he wrong on? So we have to be careful about sensationalizing these events.
Yeah, we do. Every year I have somebody that predicts the timing of the rapture at Rosh Hashanah, and now I'm having them come out about Pentecost, because Pentecost is the next event on Israel's. Well, we have Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then Pentecost. But we have these, and every year they roll around. They've been rolling around for a long, long, long time regarding the rapture, who Antichrist is, who false prophet is, and so forth. Yes, I would say Putin is very Gog-esque, and the false prophet, or the Pope, certainly acts like what I would call the false prophet according to the book of Revelation, but we need to be careful. We have typologies, and I would say both of them would play a really good type for who these two characters will be in the last days, and maybe they are it. But I think there's other questions that we'd be better off.
Well, speaking addressing. Of the rapture, I'm going to go on the record and make a prediction for you, Tom, of the timing of the rapture.
Let's hear it.
It's an imminent event. Nothing has to happen before it, so we should be ready now, because Jesus Christ could come at any given moment to take us out of here. And the more we see things going on in the world, heading toward the tribulation, where the wrath of God gets poured out and we're not appointed to, the closer we have to understand Jesus Christ is about to come get us, and he yearns to come get us. One of the things, I had dinner with Chuck Missler, the late Chuck Missler, one time, and he said, Bill, one of the things that astounds me about the rapture is that Jesus yearns to come get his bride. And that just really astounded Chuck, how Jesus could yearn to do that. And so I would just tell the viewers, listen, Jesus Christ could come at any given moment. And what's going to get left behind is a tendency, with all this weakness we're seeing out there and this wartime stuff going on, to form a world order, new axis of evil, etc. So we need to be ready for Jesus to come at any given time.
Amen. Bill, I mean, you just brought up some really good points, just being ready for that. I want to say this is going to get some of our viewers really mad at me, but I'm going to say it anyways. I believe when you look at the Jewish feast days, they're prophetic to the nation of Israel and to the coming of Christ, not the rapture. And I know that upsets people. So when you look at the spring feast, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Passover, and Pentecost, the first coming of Christ, related to that, his death and resurrection. Okay. Then you look at the fall feast. A lot of Christians will say, well, they're related to the rapture because you have the sound of the trumpet. You got Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, I would agree. I believe it's the nation of Israel and the second coming of Christ, but the rapture and second coming are not the same thing. The second coming is when Jesus comes back at the end of the tribulation, establishes his kingdom on earth with the Jews in Jerusalem, and all of us who are believers in Christ get to rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. But I believe that we pigeonhole ourselves if we say, well, the rapture has to happen during the fall feast, or the rapture has to happen during the spring feast. We box ourselves into a corner, and no longer is the rapture going to happen at any moment. You know, we start.
Right. I agree. I agree with you on that wholeheartedly, Tom. It takes away from imminency. If you're waiting for it to happen on some Feast of Trumpets or something like that, you've lost the imminency. You know, that happens at various times. We're looking for it at any given time, on any given moment, in any given day.
Amen. I'd like to think it happens right now, but okay. Another question. This comes from Marky Mark. A question: will this war be a catalyst of the okay, let me reread this. Will this war be a catalyst, or the catalyst, for the 10 toes of iron and clay formation of Europe?
Well, the 10 toes extrapolates into the 10 kings, and they show up in Revelation 17 and elsewhere. And they receive power in 1 hour with the Antichrist at that time in the midpoint of the tribulation. Some people suspect they come out of the revived Roman Empire, but I believe you can have a world in disarray that will be put into a 10-division state. And the Antichrist will be the world leader at that time, and he will call upon 10 political leaders, maybe even religious leaders, but he's going to call on 10 and make them leaders over those provinces. But I don't suggest that this right here is leading to that, because the 10 kings are in the strong in the midpoint of the tribulation, and they get upset, as is the Antichrist, with the harlot world religion at that time, in Revelation chapter 17, 16, and they actually desolate the harlot world religion. So they've got a very significant role in the end times, but we're not in the midpoint of the tribulation just yet.
Yeah, I would agree. In fact, we've done a DVD series on that too, where you ask you questions, and it was a documentary that we actually have. That's available. I don't have it for sale on my website. I don't have anything for sale on my website, but you have it available, don't you?
Yeah, it's called the Pre-Tribulation Prophecies. It's a 2-disc DVD prophetic documentary we did. Outstanding work. There's about 21 prophecies that could happen before the tribulation. And they can get that. You and I both did that together. They can get that at prophecydepot.com, like Home Depot, Prophecy Depot.
And I believe prophecy, it's actually on the, people can see it on YouTube. You can see how to access Bill's website right there. And then also, if you guys, Matt and Gabe, if you could put that in the description too, so people can just click on the link. Next question. This comes from Rose. Question: Putin's threat of nuclear missiles won't cause a global nuclear war. Let's see where to go. It won't cause a global nuclear war. It would bring global destruction. If it did, wouldn't it change the end times Bible prophecy?
Well, we know Russia is not going to be destroyed as a result of what's going on here, because Russia lives again to be part of Ezekiel 38, which is stage setting at this point in time. Well, it doesn't look to me like we're going to see the UK or America wiped off the stage either, because I think they're going to be compromised. I think America's on the decline right now. But I think we're protesters in Ezekiel 38:13. We're not going to see Europe going down in nuclear war, because the revived Roman Empire has got to happen, and the Antichrist comes out of that revived Roman Empire. So I'm not extremely concerned about the threat of nuclear war at this point in time. We may see a nuclear weapon go off. You could see Russia flex its muscles and do that, in, if you could call it a sanitary type condition. But I mean, I don't think the whole world's going to go at each other with a lot of nuclear weapons, not in this episode.
I'm going to throw another question out there. Do you think there's a possibility of an EMP or a major cyber attack taking the United States out of the equation?
Now, that's highly possible, because those technologies exist presently. And Russia and China, perhaps even North Korea down the road, could employ something like that. For some reason, America's declines from its superpower status. If we are on the sidelines in Ezekiel 38 protesting, we're not coming to fight alongside Israel. We're simply, slapping sanctions or whatever we're doing America's doing at that point in time. I believe something happens that causes the decline severely of this country. This country's already said goodbye to God over the last 60 years, took prayer out of the schools, Bible reading out of the schools, can't defend the constitutionality of marriage, one man to one woman, DOMA, approve same-sex marriages. We've got the leaders we deserve at this point in time, and that's another sign of when an empire starts to collapse.
Yep. Next question. This comes from Michael. Does Psalm 83 appear to take place before Ezekiel 38? I know you pretty much answered it earlier. You can give a short answer here right now.
Yes, I believe so, because that would be the reason that the Arab countries that surround Israel and the proxies of Iran are included in that, are not involved in the Ezekiel 38 battle, because they've already been involved and devastated by their own prophecy in Psalm 83. And Ezekiel 38, the descriptions of when Israel is invaded in verses 7 through 13 is Israel's dwelling securely, without walls, bars, nor gates, and a peaceful people in receipt of great plunder and booty. And Israel presently, because of those Arab enemies around them, is not dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. They've got walls to the north with Lebanon. They've got walls even between Jordan and Israel. They got walls to the south down by Egypt. The Gaza's fenced off. So, I believe that's going to happen, and Israel is going to be able to invite more aliyah and more opportunity, and they may even discover oil by then. I know some people would hope that happens that are invested in Zion Oil, so maybe that'll happen too. We don't know.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, they definitely have the gas reserves that they've got now. This is a question from Brad. I recently had a friend who said the 10 kings were from Magog. I've never heard this before. Where would theologians get this idea?
Well, I'm going to take a guess at that, but I'm not sure I can answer that 100%. There are some people like Joel Richardson who believe in an Islamic Antichrist, and that the 10 kings would be Islamic nations, perhaps involved in Ezekiel 38, that sort of thing. They put Turkey as instead of Russia in that place of Magog. So I don't know where they came up with that, but I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I don't either, but that's a better answer than I would have come up with. I was just going to say, I have no idea where they come up with this. Do you see any prophetic implications of the Russians using Chechens and mercenaries?
I don't see that. I mean, again, it goes back to the earlier conversation that Russia is trying to spread its hegemony and revive the Soviet Empire. Putin is just adamant about doing that right now, and we're starting to see that manifest in Ukraine.
Yeah. Okay, so this other, I got another question on here. These questions are coming in pretty fast. This comes from Vivian, but it's very similar to a question I was going to ask you on the timing of Ezekiel chapter 38. You see it as pre-trib, mid-trib, at the end of the trib? I know I got a good idea of where you see it because we talk a lot, but it's a fascinating, people want to know, and go for it.
Right. Well, and you and I think, have agreed that we believe it's a pre-tribulation event for the reasons I'm about to share. And by the way, we cover this, Tom and I do, in the Pre-Tribulation Prophecies DVD, as do Mondo and I in the Ezekiel 38 When God Defends Israel DVD. So we go into exhaustive teachings on that. One of the primary reasons is that we believe it's a pre-tribulation event, and this is agreed upon by Dr. Ronald Fruchtenbaum, Dr. Ron Rhodes, and many others, is because the burning of the weapons for 7 years is I believe, sort of a timing detail. In the aftermath, when God has stopped the invaders, Israel is going to go out, and they're going to gain world renown for this, it says in Ezekiel 39. And they're going to convert the weapons into energy, and they're going to do it over a period of 7 years. And so they could do that before the tribulation for 3.5 years, and they can do that during the first half of the tribulation for 3.5 years, because during the first half of the tribulation, they're living in peace. It's a pseudo-peace because it's going to get broken at the midpoint of the tribulation by the Antichrist. But they believe they're living in peace, and they could be converting weapons into energy before the tribulation and during the first half. But in the second half, they're not going to be burning weapons because they're going to be fleeing from their lives, trying to avoid a genocidal campaign of the Antichrist. Even Jesus said in Matthew 24:15, he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, then flee to the mountains, get out of there immediately. And he was alluding to them fleeing over to the southern Jordan area in the mountains of Petra. And so they won't be burning and converting weapons. They'll be fleeing for their lives. If anything, they'll try to grab a weapon on the way to defend themselves. Now, the other thing, too, is the reason I think the timing is pre-tribulation, it's a lesser thought on this, but I think it's important. I said earlier that God is going to use this event to make the world know he's the one true God. It's a wake-up call for the world. And so to me, God would do that before the tribulation, before the Antichrist comes on the scene, and the supernatural deception is being spread around the world, and people are standing in line to take the mark of the beast, and so they can buy and sell and that sort of thing. I don't think God's going to go at the midpoint of the trib, oy vey, I wish I would have told the world earlier that I'm the one true God. So I think God's timing is important. He wants to come out in front and say, look, I'm here. I'm the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the promise-keeping God of Jesus Christ. Put your faith in me, because coming around the corner is the worst of all times.
Yeah, I think that is one of the best statements I've heard on that, is that God is letting everybody know ahead of time, because the things that are coming are going to be so bad. There's this, for some reason, there's people that seem to think that the world is going to think Antichrist is the one who gives Israel the victory, so Israel's going to worship Antichrist. That is not what happens. It is, Ezekiel 39 is very clear. God gets the glory in it, and he to the world, he discloses who he is, and the world recognizes this is God. We have and we have a problem. Some are going to glorify him. And it could be the thing, Bill, that we see early on in the tribulation period. You know, you come to the fifth seal, you have the people who have turned to Christ, they are saved, and they're martyred for their faith. And it could very well be the Ezekiel 38 battle where God is glorified. They recognize, hey, those crazy Christians who told me about Jesus were right. And things really did happen this way because God definitely gets the world's attention in that battle.
Right. So this would be a 1-2 punch, if you will. In other words, if the rapture happened before Ezekiel 38, and I'm not saying it will, it could happen before, during, or after, but before the tribulation. And I think the church is, if I take a guess, the church will probably be raptured before Ezekiel 38, because 3 times in Ezekiel 38 and 39, God is alluding to his people as my people Israel. There's really, this is about God and him upholding the Abrahamic covenant. The church doesn't really need to be here, but just presume that the rapture has happened and people get left behind, and they would go, well, wow, the Christians were all just taken out of here. Maybe that really was the rapture. And then all of a sudden, God upholds his holy name through this battle. It's a 1-2 punch, if you will. In other words, why would you not become a believer after seeing these 2 major events happen that were prophesied and fulfilled before your very eyes?
Yep. Great. It was great having you on with me today, Bill. I promised you 45 minutes, and we only went 51. So how's that?
That's great.
It was great. So listen, everyone, you can get a hold of Bill. You can contact him. You see his contact there right beneath his name. And then also I want to encourage everybody that's watching, listen, there's several different things. I have my updates that are going to be coming this week. Starting in just a few weeks, I've got Wednesdays. I'm going to do 3 Wednesdays with Mark Henry. And we're going to be talking about what you can do to be well prepared for the times that we live in. I've been talking about this lately. Assets, what kind of assets do you need? How to do self-protection and also spiritual protection. We're going to be taking 3 different Wednesdays. It's going to be a live video similar to this on Mondays. And my guest next week is going to be John, coming from Australia. Is going to be my live guest. And we haven't had anybody on for a while from Australia. Jay was with us. This time it's going to be John. And also I want to encourage you to go to Bill's website. Also go to my website, hopefortimes.com, to stay connected with me. And let's see if I have anything else here. Yes. Oh, and subscribe to YouTube, this YouTube channel. It helps us out a lot. And by the way, last night, for those of you who are watching, I had Mark Henry in studio. It was a great opportunity. Usually I'm by myself in studio. And what happened was with Mark, we had our first live on YouTube and live on the website. And we had a lot of viewers on the website. And it looks like we're going to be able to do that. We're going to be able to broadcast on Roku, and all, pretty much every different channel that we possibly can, starting this Sunday night. From then on out, for all of the midweeks, things like this that we do, Bill, that I'm doing with Bill today, our Monday Lives and so forth. And also I want to thank everybody for all of your support. Listen, I know I'm not great at giving shout outs to super chats. I don't know. I'm just not, Bill, I'm not good at that part. But anyways, thank you everybody for all of your support. You guys are awesome. We couldn't do this. And please be praying about our opportunities in Mexico that we now have, and being able to think of all the people that we can reach with the truth. That's just great. Really appreciate your prayers for that. And I'll fill you in on some of the other things that are coming. Bill, any final words you have for everyone?
Ancient prophecies are about to roll off their parchments and pound down on the pavement and pack a powerful global punch. And God wants you to be aware of these and be prepared for these. So stay tuned to programs like Tom's, and make sure you get your hands on that Pre-Tribulation Prophecies DVD and Ezekiel 38 DVD. You'll be informed and prepared.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Bill. It's great having you. By the way, Bill and I, amongst with a whole bunch of other speakers, are going to be in Colorado Springs at a prophecy conference there in May with Prophecy Watchers. You can check that out. Pete Garcia is added to the list there this year, as is Olivier Melnick. So there's going to be a lot of us in Colorado Springs, and go there, get your tickets, Prophecy Watchers website. Thank you, Bill, for joining me today. It's a real blessing. And I hope that your week is richly blessed by the Lord.
Thank you, Tom.